1993. Hamburg. A desk by the window. I once wrote slogans for the 5-year plan. Now I write slogans for Shampoo. The client changed, the tricks did not. A man in his 50s writes it down. He signs only K. He does not show it to the creative director. He copies it into a notebook. He dates it. The sentence is a confession and a ledger. It is a line that could not be spoken in his old office. It is a line that will take decades to earn. He had another notebook once. The pages smelled of dust and coal. The first entry was in pencil. May 9th, 1945. Leipzig. The sirens are quiet. Mother says it is over. The radio plays soft music. Everyone is whispering, I am hungry. The immediate aftermath was arithmetic, first of stones, then of calories. Leipzig fell on April 20 to American troops. It reverted to the Soviet zone in July. The front had passed. The work had not. Trommerfrauen picked bricks out of skeletal walls, stacking them into clean columns that made order from disaster. The boys dragged beams. The men who were left looked at the ground. He remembers the sound of boots on broken glass. Britannica calls it rubble. The German documents call it shot. The most common word in the diaries is simply Stein. There were missing persons. A father at Stalingrad. An uncle reburied under a nameless field. A cousin who followed a column west and never wrote back. A city is a map of absences. In Leipzig, the map was thick with them. An Allied intelligence summary from the summer of 1945 described a population stunned, fearful, materially exhausted, morally confused. It listed curfew hours. It noted that the people learned to judge danger by the tone of foreign soldiers' voices. Order arrived with occupation forces. The American military government posted proclamations in spring. The Soviet military administration, SMAD, posted orders in summer. The curfews were strict. The language of control was hard. There were raids. There were commandeered apartments. There were rumors that you learned to ignore or to whisper, depending on who stood near you. The old Nazi slogans were painted over with white. Later, new slogans would appear over the whitewash. The boy named Karl learned silence. The arithmetic of survival was simple. You did not hang flags. You did not keep portraits. You kept your ration cards dry. The winter of 1946-47 became a name. Hunger Winter. It was not poetic, it was an inventory. The British zone documented per capita food rations averaging 1,000 to 1,500 calories per day. The American zone had slightly more. The Soviet zone often had less. The numbers sank with the coal deliveries. The temperature sank with the coal. In the notebooks of Leipzig's city authorities, Bundesarchiv Leipzig, you can find the lists. Bread, potatoes, sugar, fats, meat. The paper is thin. The handwriting is neat. In the kitchens, the arithmetic of hunger made new recipes. Coffee became roasted barley. Tobacco became leaves. Cigarettes became currency. A single American cigarette could buy eggs, potatoes, a bus ride, gossip. A maternal aunt took a small packet of wedding linen to the market and came back with 4 onions and a heel of lard. Somewhere, a silver spoon changed hands for 2 kilos of rye. Somewhere else, a librarian counted out cigarettes to a farmer like coins. There was a phrase in the occupation reports, the black market adjusts supply and demand. It sounded like a lecture. In the alleys, it sounded like coughing. The boy watched women hammer mortar off bricks. They were called Trümmerfrauen. The word made work sound noble. The work was not noble. It was necessary. There were whispers of retribution. A former party member was led away. Another man was thrown into a filthy basement and beaten. An American soldier stopped it. A Soviet soldier did not. The records are fragmentary. The fear was not. History is also arithmetic of categories. After spring came forms. In the American zone, denazification came with paper. Fragebogen, questionnaires, Spruchkammern, tribunals, millions of forms printed, filled, misfilled, refilled. The categories were 5, like the fingers of a hand. Hauptschuldig, belastet, Midjur belastet, Midjur belastet, Medjur offenders, 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 lesser offenders, followers, exonerated. In Bavaria and Hesse, between 1946 and 1948, the Spruchkammern processed about 3.6 million people. The mathematics of guilt had to be scaled to fit the day. A farmer who sat on a town council in 1938 became a case file. A woman who organized Winterhilfswerk collections in 1942 became a hearing. A police officer who signed a deportation order became a category. The columns of decisions are dry. The lives are not. In the Soviet zone, denazification was no less real, but differently organized. SMAD Order No. 2 replaced school principals. SMAD Order No. 2. 24 interned dangerous elements. Land reform took estates from Junkers and those who supported the Hitler regime and handed them to landless farmers and smallholders. In practice, the line between justice and convenience blurred. In the East, the emphasis was not on categories, but on replacement. Antifascistische Ausschüsse, antifascistische Ausschüsse, anti-fascist committees appointed new officials. The new officials needed administrators. The administrators had pasts. Pasts were cleaned. In a Leipzig school report, 1946, District Education Office, you can read the minutes. Teacher H, former party member since 1937. No record of political delinquency. Pedagogically capable. Can be used. The system needed people who knew where the files were. It also needed a story. The boy Karl watched his teacher disappear, then reappear. He learned new words for old things. Comrade instead of Herr. Collective instead of nation. The arithmetic of authority resorted the same desks. He heard an old man say, "We were all followers." He saw a young woman with a child say, "We did not know." He read in a newspaper that Hitler fascismus was the product of monopoly capital. He read in another paper that Germany must be re-educated. He saw that both sentences left blank spaces where faces should be. The mathematics of guilt was not done with names. It was done with needs. Who went to prison? Some. Who quietly returned to their desks? Many. Who wrote reports on others? The archives tell those stories in the tidy cursive of informers and the stamped seals of acceptance. Displacement added more arithmetic. The numbers were staggering. Between 1944 and 1950, approximately 12 million ethnic Germans fled or were expelled from East Prussia, Silesia, Pomerania, the Sudetenland, and other territories. The word is Vertriebenen. Expellees. They arrived with bundles. They arrived with stories packed in boxes. They arrived in towns already short of roofs. In Schleswig-Holstein, the population jumped by more than 60%. In Lower Saxony, by a third. In Uckermark and Mecklenburg, new faces filled old farmhouses. The American Zone wrote in one report, "The influx of refugees continues to strain housing and provisioning to the breaking point. Rooms became fractions. Beds had schedules. The arithmetic of hospitality became the arithmetic of resentment." A woman in Marburg wrote in December 1946, Stadtarchiv Marburg, "3 refugees are now in our front room. They are exhausted and the little one coughs. Mother says, and I am ashamed to write it, that they smell different. I am ashamed of myself." A mayor in Lübeck reported to the British, May 1947, "We have received 9,000 more. There is no space." The locals complain. They say they take our bread. I answer, there is no bread. The numbers defeat us. In the Soviet zone, the expellees were categorized as Umsiedler, resettlers, and assigned to districts. They were told to become new farmers, new workers. Integration was a policy. It was also a test. A young man from Breslau who had lost his father at the Oder moved into a Saxon village schoolhouse. He wrote in a letter now in a Bundesarchiv collection, "They look at us like disease. I do not blame them. We are always asking for things. The mathematics of scarcity sharpened, the mathematics of identity hardened. Next to these Germans were other lives, different arithmetic. Displaced persons, DPs, Jews who had survived ghettos and camps, forced laborers from Poland and Ukraine, French and Dutch prisoners of war, Allied pilots rescued from the wrong barn. They lived in camps near German towns. They were close. They were far away. Zielsheim near Frankfurt, Fürchenwald near Wolfratshausen, Bergen-Belsen, now a DP camp instead of a charnel ground, Landsberg on the Lech, where a different kind of transport arrived, sardine tins, cod liver oil, powdered eggs under the label of UNRA and later IRO. In their newspapers, printed in Yiddish and Polish, the words are full of life. In German papers, the words skirt around them. A German girl in Celle wrote in June 1946, "We hear singing from the camp on Friday evenings. It is beautiful. Father says we should not go. He says they have their own police. I think we are the ones who should have police." Some Germans went to the fences and looked. Some soldiers brought their girlfriends and looked. Some looked away. A doctor in Kassel wrote to an American officer, September 1945, "I did not know. I knew something, but I did not know." The officer wrote in his report, "This is a common statement. The mathematics of denial is cruel. It adds only zeros. The arithmetic of acknowledgement is harder. It assigns numbers to faces. It takes time and a different kind of hunger." The boy Karl saw a train at Leipzig Hauptbahnhof in November 1945. He saw a group of women in coats too large and shoes too small. He saw numbers tattooed on arms. He asked his mother. She said nothing. She squeezed his shoulder. He remembers the squeeze more than the scene. Silence can be a kind of teaching. His notebooks learned it. Work returned. Work returned. Work is another arithmetic. In the West, the economy staggered and then straightened. The Marshall Plan delivered Sachs-marked ERP. The currency reform of June 1948 replaced Reichsmark with Deutsche Mark. Prepared in secret by Americans and Germans in Frankfurt and brought into being with a Sunday announcement and printed notes. The effect was immediate. Shelves filled. Black markets emptied. Prices rose to clarity. Dignity returned with hard edges. Erhard said, "No price controls." He said, "Social market economy." The phrase was a spell. It changed the tempo of life in the American and British zones. It also changed the shape of expectations. In the East, the Soviet zone became the German Democratic Republic in 1949. The language of the new state was certainty. The factories became VEBs, Volkseigene Betriebe. People became Werktätige, working people. The narrative was anti-fascism, planned progress, equality for those who cooperate. Karl grew up with this new grammar. He became an apprentice typesetter in 1949, a craft of alignment and ink. He joined the Free German Youth, FDJ. He learned that fonts could carry seriousness and joy. He learned that literal blocks could carry messages. He moved from the composing room to a district newspaper office in 1952. The paper was the Leipziger Volkszeitung, now aligned with the Socialist Unity Party, SED. He wrote small items about harvests and quotas. He wrote that the plan was fulfilled by 103%. He wrote that brigades named after Thälmann had exceeded targets. He wrote that the workers of VEB Bundgarmwerk greet the 5-year plan with new initiatives. The adjectives were large. The nouns were precise. The mathematics of the plan was always a little fantastic and always a little real. Tons counted. Units counted. Lives counted differently. The reports added up to pride. The shelves did not always add up to abundance. On June 17, 1953, workers in East Berlin walked out. In Halle, Merseburg, Bitterfeld, they followed. In Leipzig's agitation department, a phone rang. A man with a pinched mouth dictated lines. Provocations by fascist agents. Tanks rolled. The uprising was suppressed. The newspapers did not list the names. Karl did not write a story about the bodies. He wrote about enemies of the people. He wrote what he was told and what he understood to be the cost of his desk. It is easy to make him into an instrument. It is equally easy to make him into a victim. The documents resist both. They show pay slips, a ration card for a new suit, letters asking for a heater, complaints about print runs, requests for vacation time in Zingst. The mathematics of complicity is not a single sum. It is a ledger that cares about increments. In 1956, after Khrushchev's speech, there were whispers again. Some editorials became careful, others did not. In 1961, the wall went up. In Leipzig, the effect was immediate in the way people looked at trains. The timetable was not just a schedule now, it was a map of impossibility. Karl sent a letter to a cousin in Hanover. It was returned. He wrote again. He used neutral phrases. He saved the returned envelopes in a drawer. He learned how to talk about weather. He married. He had a son. He moved to an office that organized campaigns for industrial productivity. The slogans became bigger. The fonts became brighter. The slogans said, Ohne Plan kein Fortschritt, jeder nach seinen Fähigkeiten, jeder nach seiner Leistung, besser leben, schöner arbeiten. He wrote those words with a straight spine and a keen eye. The tricks are old. They are not always malicious. They are the tricks of making a sentence hold desire. In the West, the years of the Wirtschaftswunder wonder became a narrative of innocence regained. Photographs show shining refrigerators and smiling women in modern dresses. There was real relief. The arithmetic of rubble had become the arithmetic of savings accounts and vacations to Italy. In those years, school books in the West often looked like little ledgers of suffering. They spoke of bombings, of hunger, of refugees. They spoke less of perpetrators, and when they did, they spoke of leaders, then moved on. There were exceptions. There were teachers who insisted. There were trials in Frankfurt in 1963-65 that made newspapers print the names of Auschwitz. There were student movements in 1968 that spoke of fathers and the scent of uniforms. In the East, the school books were different. They spoke of anti-fascist resistance, of communists in prisons and concentration camps. They spoke of Buchenwald as a political martyrdom. They spoke of the Soviet Union as a liberator. They did not speak much of Jewish lives as Jews. They did not dwell on collaboration by neighbors when the neighbors were nay comrades. They did not ask children to look into their grandfather's rooms and count the medals. Karl visited Buchenwald with his son's school in 1974. The guide spoke of Ernst Thälmann. The group stood in front of a plaque that said, in large letters, Jedem das Sein. The children were silent. The teacher spoke of anti-fascists who fought and died. He did not speak about the yellow badges or the Polish Jewish children murdered in early 1945. Whether he did not know or did not emphasize, the archive does not say. The boy held his father's hand. The father felt the bones in the boy's fingers like thin wires. The mathematics of memory is not a simple choice between telling and forgetting. It is a negotiation of frames. It is a division of sorrow. Karl's work became smoother. In the 1970s, the state needed images of contentment. The stores were often short. The slogans filled the gap. Plaste und elaste aus Skopau. Unser Brot wird besser. He wrote a line for a soap made in a VEB, sanfte zur Haut, stark für unsere Republik, gentle on skin, strong for our republic. He did not get extra butter for it, though sometimes he got extra soap. The state had a file on him. Stasi District Office. It is a thin file. It contains notes on his attendance at editorial meetings, one report by a colleague with the codename Falter, and a remark that K shows occasional skepticism but is reliable. There is one intercepted letter to his cousin in Hanover. It contains a line, "We are fine, it is winter." The boy grows. The file notes, "No hostile content." The mathematics of surveillance is this: 1,000 small papers that multiply 100 times to make the habits of one person. In 1980, a strike in Poland caused unease. In 1983, the West German Chancellor visited the East. The news smiled. In 1989, the news could not catch up with the streets. In Leipzig, Mondays became something else. The Nikolaikirche filled. The chant, "Wir sind das Volk," traveled like heat. In the office, where Karl now supervised younger copywriters, he sat very still. He remembered 1953. He remembered the tanks. He remembered the editor with the pinched mouth. The younger ones went to the square. He watched the clock. When they came back the next day, they were excited. The walls were already cracking. October, November. Files were carried out by the armful. Some were burned. Some were saved. People looked each other in the eyes. Some looked away. People started to calculate what to say. People decided what to keep. The wall opened. The trains went west. The arithmetic of the transition was brutal. The Treuhandanstalt took the VEBs and turned them into numbers and offers. Factories that had been part of life became lines in a report. In 1990–1994, millions lost jobs. Severance letters stacked like bricks. Karl's department was dissolved in early 1991. He was 53. He wrote a curriculum vitae that made his job sound neutral. He left out certain phrases. He sent it to companies in Leipzig, then in Berlin, then in Hamburg. He got a call back from an agency in Hamburg in late 1992. The younger man on the phone liked his portfolio. It was full of posters about soap and meat grinders. The younger man said, "We can use this tone." He moved. He rented a small room in Altona. He traveled back to Leipzig on some weekends. His wife did not like Hamburg. The son had left on his own. Families also calculate. In 1993, he wrote the sentence in his notebook, "I once wrote slogans for the 5-year plan. Now I write slogans for Shampoo." The client changed. The tricks did not. It is an indictment. It is also a confession of skill. It is how he learned to turn scarcity into desire and ideology into comfort. He sits in an office that smells of coffee and new plastic. He writes, "Shine that lasts, care you can feel." He thinks of quality for all. He thinks of exceed the plan. He recognizes the cadence. He sees that the mathematics of persuasion is invariant across regimes. It sells plans. It sells conditioners. It sells conditioners. It sells normalcy. He knows the other arithmetic still matters. He has watched, after 1990, memory become a public negotiation. He sees the traveling exhibitions about the bombing war, the photographs of burnt-out city centers, the stories of the night Hamburg burned in 1943, the memories of Dresden in 1945. He also sees the debates about the center against expulsions, the arguments over whose suffering makes which kinds of monuments. He reads that the West German Spruchkammer process, surveyed in an OM-GUS report from 1948, had produced only limited punitive outcomes, 5% major offenders, or offenders, a majority classified as Mitläufer, followers, a significant minority exonerated. He reads that by the early 1950s, amnesty laws and the necessities of Cold War administration had restored careers for many who had signed forms 20 years earlier. He watches a former West German judge who once served under a different code retire with honors in the 1980s. He watches a former East German prosecutor who once signed political indictments face an investigation in the 1990s. He knows that justice is an uneven terrain. He has no illusions left about equilibrium. He sits in a Hamburg cafe with colleagues born in 1965 who say, "We had nothing to do with it." He does not argue. He knows that they carry their own arithmetic of RAF bombings, of NATO missiles, of unemployment graphs. He also knows that the past is an annuity that pays out in silences. He visits Leipzig in 1995. He sees the inner city cleaned. He sees the Nikolaikirche, now a tourist site. He sees a plaque for 1989. He sees a plaque for 1989. He does not see a plaque for the train he saw in 1945. History chooses what to plant. He finds his old schoolbook. It has pictures of workers with upright posture and slogans in clear sans serif. It mentions fascism like a fever that passed. It does not ask who administered the fever. In Hamburg, he meets a man whose father was an expellee from East Prussia. The man speaks of grain fields and a lost farmhouse. He speaks of the grandmother who cried every winter. He does not speak of neighbors who were marched to the rail station in 1942. He knows and does not say, "We all have our arithmetic." The conversation remains polite. He watches a debate on television about a new school curriculum. The panelists talk about balance. He hears in that word the old equation, this much sorrow for that much guilt. He knows mathematics does not work that way. He has learned that addition is not atonement. There are documents he has never read. He has not asked for his file in full. He has asked only for the envelope from 1973. It contains more than he expected and less than he feared. It is banal. He recognizes his own handwriting on a form where he admitted nothing and said little. He feels no catharsis. He feels relief, then a kind of loss. He goes to the Bundesarchiv in Berlin in 1997. He asks to see, for no reason he can quite explain, municipal papers from Leipzig, 1946. He looks at the lists again: bread, potatoes, coal, sugar, fats. He runs his finger along a column. He thinks of his mother cutting potatoes into slices thin enough to fry without oil. He thinks of the men in coats too big. He finds a folder labeled Schulwesen, 1946 to 1947. He reads about Teacher H. He remembers him. He remembers his careful voice. He wonders what H said to his own file. He reads an OM-GUS survey report that asked Germans in 1946 whether they believed in collective guilt. The percentages vary by zone. Many said no. Some said yes. Almost all said they were tired. He reads a denazification file from Hesse or Württemberg, where a small-town mayor is deemed a Mitläufer, allowed to continue. There is a letter from the local clergy, a letter from a Jewish survivor who says, "He saved my neighbor's son." There is a letter from someone who writes no more. The Spruchkammer marks Category 4. A stamp falls. A life goes on. The GDR had its own stamps. They were harder to see. They marked the biographies of those admitted to the party and those excluded. They marked apartments, vacations, jobs. They marked who could speak which lines. In an East German factory newsletter from 1979, now in the archives, Karl finds a piece he wrote about a new lathe. He described its efficiency with pride. He remembers the day. He saw the lathe. He met the foreman who wanted parts to work. He remembers the foreman's wife asking him for jeans from Intershop. He remembers that nothing about that day was ideology, and everything was. He returns to Hamburg. He writes copy that talks about softness, brightness, and modernity. The products arrive. The stores are full. The lights are bright. The arithmetic of abundance has its own cruelty. It wastes what the older arithmetic counted. He throws away a loaf with mold that would once have been cut away meticulously. He stands by the trash bin and feels a wave of something that is not quite shame and not quite anger. He writes in his notebook, late, with a small lamp on. January 13, 1999. We were taught that history is a line. It behaves more like a spiral. He thinks of the Trümmerfrauen and the staged photographs of Trümmerfrauen taken later, and the arguments about how many there were, and the way every city loved the image of its women working, the way every city needed heroes that did not carry rifles. He thinks of how those images made dignity out of necessity. He respects the work. He is suspicious of the pictures. He is old enough to allow both. He remembers his father only as a photograph. He remembers the day in 1950 when a letter arrived with a stamped seal and a few lines. He remembers his mother folding that letter 8 times and then twice more. He remembers that they did not cry. There is no arithmetic for that. He reads about trials in unified Germany where very old men sit in court and say very little. He reads about younger prosecutors insisting. He admires their energy. He wonders about their arithmetic. He wonders whether late justice adds or merely balances a hollow line. He watches a commercial he wrote in 1995 on a television in a waiting room in 2001. A woman with clean hair smiles and closes her eyes. A voice says, "Because you're worth it," in German. He thinks of 1955 and a poster with a woman holding a saucepan in a VEB canteen. The caption, "Du bist wichtig für uns." You are important to us. He smiles, not unkindly. The words are not the same. The trick is, he returns to Leipzig in 2005 for a reunion with colleagues who once wrote the scripts of a world that closed. They drink beer. They talk about pensions. They make jokes about old slogans. They feel relief. They feel bitterness. Some have written books. Some have written nothing. He visits the Nikolai Kirch again. There is a plaque with a sentence about courage. There were names on a list once for a different kind of enrollment. He does not say them out loud. He looks at his son, who has come with him. The son reads the plaque with polite attention. The son works in Munich for a software company. He speaks English in meetings. He has a different set of slogans in his head. He loves his father. He asks few questions. The boy who once wrote, "I am hungry," is an old man who eats lightly. He keeps his notebooks. He keeps some clippings. He gives some to an archive. He burns some. He knows that keeping and burning are themselves a kind of argument with the future. He writes one last long entry. He copies down dates he does not want to forget. He writes the names of 3 men who helped him and the names of 2 who harmed him. He writes that the categories are insufficient. He writes that the mathematics of guilt remains, but that it is not the only arithmetic that made his life. The archive derived details that structured his decades. The ration cards, the Spruchkammer categories, the SMAD orders, the SMAD orders, the ERP sacks, the Buchenwald tours, the Stasi file, become, in his mind, a structure of rooms. In each room, a sentence waits. He opens the doors and recites them silently like prayers. He takes out the first page from 1993. He reads it again. It also loosens. It becomes less about clever phrasing and more about how one learns to survive by pressing language into the service of whatever power feeds you, and how difficult it is to unknot that in later years. He knows he is not exceptional. He reads oral histories in which others say similar things in different words. He knows these are stories of millions, in apartments and gardens, in factories and offices, in the West and in the East, who built private lives around public narratives and never quite resolved the equation. He closes the notebook. He writes a new date. February Wise. A new date. February 2, 2007. Hamburg. No one asked us to be quiet. They asked us to be quiet. They asked us to rebuild. They gave us categories and ration cards. We took them and lived. The later demand is memory. We do not know how to price it. The documents will outlast his sentences. The agencies will close. The archives will open. The shoeboxes will be thrown out. The freezes and thaws of memory will go on. A final inventory remains, of bricks, of calories, of names. He knows that the front line after 1945 ran through his memory and his paperwork, and that is why he wrote, on a bright morning in 1993, a dangerous line he could not have spoken when the client was a state and the tricks were the same.